We're up to chapter 304, beginning of discourse, Mimer 75, which is page 617 in volume 1 of Ayin Beis, which will be the last chapter in this subplot about the meeting place of existence and transcendence. And summing up what we learned in the last chapter is briefly the repair, the alignment, the healing, an alignment of existence and transcendence, which we were referring to as being energy and container, and yesh, and keli, ayin and yesh. Truthfully, in truth, happens from above. Meaning, when you say happens from above, it means Mamayla, meaning it's the ingredient that causes it to take place is an element that is coming from higher than the container and the energy themselves. And that element is what the container energy, through their bittul access. They access the capacity for them to get out of their own nature and to put themselves aside and go contrary to the nature, that the neshama, the soul, or the energy will descend into the container, into the body, and the body will reach and be receptive to the soul. The container will be receptive to the energy. But yet, we can cause this to take place through our efforts. It's not just a gift from above. We can cause it to take place through our efforts, and our efforts consist of, from the soul's perspective, the soul engaging, immersing itself, and involving the body by its contemplation in a way that is patient, deliberate, grounded, integrated, and in the context of the Vushya Saga, where it's rational and explained, like as if the soul is the teacher of the body and as the student. So the teacher is applying himself, not doing it quickly or flippantly or dismissively. The soul is applying itself and engaging and figuring out the way to train and sublimate the body. And this the soul does with Kabbalah sale. It has to compel itself to do that, put itself aside, because it requires additional effort for it to so-called lower itself to the body. But once it does it, it becomes a kinyan nefesh, it becomes acquired, it becomes an acquisition, something that becomes a property of the soul's personality as well. And the body has to do the opposite. It has to break itself, break its yeshus, its crassness, in order to be receptive to the energy, which again requires it setting itself aside. That's in healing dysfunctional type 1, where the transcendence and existence are two separate, compartmentalized. To repair and heal, align dysfunctional type 2, where the container is too weak or porous, there the container, the body has to do is the opposite. It has to be built up, has to be strengthened, has to be emboldened, empowered. And that, he says, is through immersion in the lofty matters of divine understanding, the lofty matters in the levels of the divine infinite light, which, he says, rejoices and strengthens the person and expands their containers. And then finally, in the last chapter, he added about another element, that they have to be commensurate to each other, proportionate to each other. So one of the things that is done from above is that when a body that a soul that is greater, more powerful, more transcendent, can be given a body that is very crass, because it has the power to tame it. Obviously, the body has to be receptive to that. And the other way, and soul that is not that transcendent, with the ayin and ma and bittul of the soul is not that radiant, not that powerful. So there you have to give that soul a so-called gentler, more tender body that doesn't take as much effort to sublimate and channel. He mentions also that the souls in the later generations, Zikvus and Mashiach, are of a lower caliber, even of the leaders. They're weaker in their bittul, and also the bodies are more distant from bittul, as it was in the early generations. So with that, we've now, I should have added, he also covered the third dysfunctional type, number 3. And that's when the body is too crass and the soul is trapped, taken hostage by the yeshus of the body, and the two becomes trapped there. So we've covered 3 dysfunctional types as far as soul and body, which of course is reflective of the dysfunctional types, an imbalance that is talked earlier about in the energy and container. So now begins discourse number 75, which again is written afterwards of the beginnings and ends. It begins with a discourse, and then he continues and resumes where he left off in the flow of the previous discourse. So we start at the bottom of page 617. This is Shabbos Parshas Saveh. The year is 5764 now. So 2 years and some from when the series of Ayin Beis began. Now remember, this is a discourse, it's a long series. It's discourse number 75 out of 144 discourses. And then there's one more volume, which was written and never delivered, never spoken. So this was delivered on that Shabbos, though the writing of most of this discourse took place earlier. But then when he delivered it, he wrote down the beginnings, the Rebbe Rasha at the beginning and end, and added different things at different stages of editing of Ayin Beis. I am to my beloved, and my beloved is to me, one who pastures amongst the roses. Now, these 4 words, I am to my beloved is to me, is Rosh Tevis El, is the acronym for the word El. Ani, the deity, Aleph, Lamed, Vav, Lamed. The Sefer Tevis Daled Yud. If you look at the end of the words, Ani, the deity, they all end with the same letter Yud. So the acronym is Elul, and the end of the words is 4 Yuds. The letter Yud is the 10th letter of the Hebrew alphabet, like a dot. What is that? So what's that referring to? What's 4 Yudin? 4 Yudin, also, every Hebrew letter in the Hebrew alphabet has a numerical equivalent called the gematria. So 4 Yuds, Yud is 10, so 4 Yuds would be 40. So these 4 Yuds allude to the 40 days that Moses was on the mountain, which were Yemei Ratzon, meaning they were auspicious days. Auspicious days. Ratzon literally means desire, will, but means it was days where where Moshe Rabbeinu encountered God and God was close to him. Because preceding that were 40 days where God says were not pleasant days. If God rejected him, of course Moses was on the mountain after he received the Torah on Shavuos. He went up the mountain 40 days and 40 nights, came back down, saw that they built the golden calf, shattered the tablets, marched back up for another 40 days to ask for forgiveness. And those 40 days begins on the 17th of Tammuz, because that's when he shattered the tablets. In other words, from Shavuos to the 17th of Tammuz is 40 days. Then he was up to the 17th of Tammuz till Rosh Chodesh Elul, and it was not successful. They're considered to be the angry days, the days of wrath. This includes the 3 weeks, of course. And Rosh Chodesh Elul, when he came down again, he went up a 3rd time, and for 40 days, and would come down Yom Kippur. So those 40 days are alluded to in the 4 Yuds, and those days were Yemei Ratzon. They were auspicious days, meaning God was receptive to his prayers. Before we continue, I just wanted to say about numbers. So the Hebrew alphabet, just a small introduction, is filled with symbolism. Besides the letters themselves, and creating words that mean something like Ani L'Dei, we see here acronym he mentions, gematria. So and not only the acronym, but also the last letters of a word. I don't know if there's a name for that. But this acronym is the Rosh Tevis, is the first letters of a word. Then there's the last letters of the word and gematria. So three different ways of Hebrew alphabet are being used there. So go now back. So the four yuds represent the 40 days. Like it says in the verse in the Torah in Deuteronomy. And I stood on the mountain like in the first days. What does the first days mean? So the Chazal, the Medrash says, and Rashi cites it, what are the first? The first set of 40 days were the first days when he received the Torah, before the golden calf. And those days were definitely auspicious days and desirable days. Because that's when he received the Torah. Moshe was studying the Torah. So when Moshe said, I stood on the mountain like in the first days, it's not just like in the sense I was there like I was there in the beginning. I was there also in the same frame of mind, the same same environment, the same state of mind, which was just like the first days was auspicious and desirable, the same as Kach Achrein, and most of the last days. So the three sets of 40 days, the last and similar to the first were auspicious. The middle ones were the difficult ones. Now, prior to this, preceding this verse, in the book of Song of Songs, Shir Shir, Song of Songs. Preceding this verse, it says, my beloved is to me, and I am to him. The same expression. Pasturing, grazing b'sheshanim amongst or within the roses. So it's a very interesting comparison. Essentially saying the same thing. Here it says, I am to my beloved is to me, grazing among the roses. There it says, my beloved is to me, I am to him, grazing among the roses. So he's asking, you have to understand, why there does it precede my beloved to me first? And here, I am to my beloved comes first. And also, what is the Inyan, what is the meaning, significance of grazing among in the Shoshanim? Shoshana is the roses, rose bushes, to be precise, or roses. And also, since the same statement is made in both verses, what is the difference between the two? It's not just being repetitive. What is the difference between the first grazing in the roses and the second one, and the one that says there, and the one that's stated here? Well, now he goes back. So now we go back to the flow. Well, the Hobbit calls it not Yeshlagdim Tchila. Sometimes I think he says Yeshlagdim Tchila. To understand all this, we have to proceed. We need to first proceed understanding what we discussed earlier, or was explained earlier. That the union, the fusion, and the interconnectivity of the energies in the containers is through them exchanging their natures and their functions. That distinction of Teva and Pula we made earlier, where in stage 1, in chapter 300, we said that it needs to be the right combination. So the first tikkun, that both of them step away and somewhat tame their natural tendency. So there, they change there, he says there that each one, what is it? The first one, they both step away from their natural tendency, they change their natures. And the second one Second tikkun is the second when they actually join and they exchange personalities where their functions. So it's the change of nature and change of function. Back to chapter 300, we discussed it there. So we explained that for them to fuse and join and interconnect through them exchanging their natures and their functions. Because on their own, they're diametric opposites of one another. They're opposites of one another. Energy is ayin, it's a transcendent, substanceless. And the keli is a substance, is identity, is existence, parameters. So how will they join together? How will their joining take place? However, the answer is this happens through the fact that the energy, travels from its transcendent state to an existent state, and the keli goes from existent state to a transcendent state. And they meet that way. It has to be the proper measure and parameters, and the proper combination, the proper formula. And if it's not measured and in the correct parameters, the correct balance, the fusion cannot take place, and the purpose, kavanah meaning the higher purpose of this whole process, will not be fulfilled at all, will not be realized at all. And it was explained, that there are four types, four ways that this can be in the negative, four types of dysfunctionality. And he's summing it up now. This is a summary of echad, the first type. The energy is excessively transcendent and the container is excessively existent. Present, yesh, identity. The second type of dysfunctionality is that the container is excessively porous, excessively transcendent, meaning it's going too much, overabundant sublimation, and it's not longer a container. It's become too porous. The third dysfunctional, that the energy, the other way, the energy is too much, too existent, meaning too compromising its transcendence, going excessively from ayin state of transcendence to a state of existence. And the fourth, the fourth is that the energy is not like in the first three where there's where the may not go from ayin liyesh, like in the first one and the third and the first one, or that the energy goes too much to ayin liyesh, which is the third one, or the container goes too much from yesh to ayin, which is the second one. Here they're both going. The energy is traveling, is moving is metamorphosizing from a state of transcendence to a state of existence. The container is metamorphosizing from a state of existence to a state of transcendence. So they both are doing that, but Vadal is when it's not in a proper measure, proper combination or formula. As he explained before, as he explained earlier, that the first three in the area of the first level of interconnectivity, where they both on their own prepare themselves to meet, and there can be three ways they just don't. And the fourth is they've gotten beyond the first gate, they've gotten through the gate and they're meeting, but the balance is not there yet. Which of course is the process of education, the process of being trained to finally to work together with each other. So you can have a situation where they don't work at all together, three different types, and then when they finally have meeting, they don't properly mix together. On page 618. And now he continues in the summary. And the repair, the healing, is in two elements, two components to it. It's in two things. One is that they should exchange their natures. that this means they exchange the nature. The nature of is transcendence. The nature of keli, container, is existence, like the wick and the flame. So the first thing is, if they just remain locked completely in their positions, you're going nowhere. So the first thing is they have to exchange their natures, where the container assumes certain qualities of transcendence, and the energy assumes certain qualities of existence, of parameters. So that's exchange of Yachlifu Tiva. The year b'midah v'shir dafka, and it should be in the proper measure, as we just said. It's not just enough that they exchange; it has to be in a way where they mix properly, or else again the wick and the flame will not meet. And this is referring. The first tikkun is referring to the three first types of dysfunctional imbalances, where the keli, the etre, and the keli are either, he said, compartmentalized, or one is compromised. So number one, they're both compartmentalized, meaning they're both locked in their place. They have not exchanged their natures. In dysfunctional type 2, the keli has become too much like etre. Dysfunctional number 3, the etre has become too much like keli. That's basically. Vatikan habeis, and the second element of healing and repair, who be'efin hadalat. That's the fourth one. Shema ayin liyesh, yesh ma'ayib mezigan nechein. That now that they have met and they have exchanged natures, that it should be in the proper measure. It's true, he says the same words here, b'midah shir, in both of them. But because ultimately, that's, if you recall in the beginning, that's a general statement. No matter every dysfunctionality is an inappropriate formula. The question is what stage it's at. The first inappropriate formula is where they don't mix at all, because for like the three different ways that they will not meet. The second, they're already meeting. Now they're already exchanging. They're already assuming something from each other. But here it's more subtle. Here it's like, think of it like a wick that's actually burning, and not overwhelming the energy. The energy is not overwhelming the container, but they still need to be exactly measured to one another. So Toyu is breaking the containers. But even that Toyu, you can still have a situation where the energy and container are not completely commensurate to each other in this second dimension. The example would be, like I said, let's say the Talmidei Rabbi Akiva, the students of Rabbi Akiva, they end up dying, because they don't respect each other. In other words, the energy destroyed the containers. The children of Nadav and Avihu, the children of Aaron, they end up getting burned up. The energy has destroyed the container. These are all examples of basically probably number 2, dysfunctional number 2. On the other hand, what's dysfunctional number 3? Like you said, the Nephilim, or the Erev Rav, where the opposite happens. The great soul gets trapped inside of a body, and now it's being schlepped down by it. So now, instead of the body being consumed by the soul is consumed by the body, essentially. And that, of course, is also destructive. The first one is, what he said, is the example where a person has a soul, it's a flame, it's a blaze, but it doesn't affect the body. And right afterwards, it goes away as if it never dissipates, as if it never happened. So in all those three, of course, there's an imbalance, but it's more than an imbalance. It's actually not going anywhere. It's destructive, and there's no... In number 4, I would say it's somebody like an average, like more or less a person who is following, he's not getting burned up by the light. He's also not overly crass, like the Nephilim, where his soul is trapped. The soul and body are working together. During davening, he thinks about the things that affect the body. He doesn't ignore it. He's not just running for his life. He's also engaging the body. But that doesn't mean that it's balanced. There's still conflict, and there's still plenty of work to do to be totally aligned. It doesn't say that. It could be only when Mashiach will come we'll actually have that full alignment. But in step number 4, in other words, in the second tikkun, now you're talking already. In once they're engaging already, the wick and the flame have met, and they're not burning out. Still, it fluctuates, as we see. So now in the 4th, it should be the proper measure, proper combination, proper formula. But if In a way, not just their nature now, but their function should be aligned to the true kavana, as we shall explain. He's going to explain this number 4, of course, because remember, number 4 he didn't address in the neshama of the guf yet. He only addressed 3 dysfunctionalities, not the 4th. See, here's Pula saying. So in the first one, you have to get them, like I said, with the mediation. You have to get them into the room. You have to get them to break their natures. You have to get them to not be locked in their personality. That's just, the energy is transcendent. Keli, container, is existent. So they both have to weaken, if you recall in the Torah, you have to first weaken that intensity of their personalities. And they're sitting now in the same room. Now comes the second step is how do we get them to appreciate each other and a give and take. Okay. As it was explained, the same thing is in the work of this divine soul and the animal soul, Ayin Beis, which are Ma and Ban within the person. Ma is the nefesh elokis, Adam, the matri Ma, same number as Ma. Behema, the matri Ban, Ayin Beis. So the Etre and Keli, Ayin Beis in Avodah is the body, soul and body. Also, we find 4 types. Type 1 is the soul is excessively transcendent, the body is excessively substance, excessively its ego, its personality, its existence. And they don't have a relationship with one another. 2, type 2. That the body and the animal soul are excessively submissive on its own, because we said the neshama has to affect its bittul, not on its own. On its own, it could just be a broken heart, or it can be a weak personality. That's 2. Number 3 is 3 is the opposite, that the soul is excessively becoming existent and compromised. V'aguf remains in its state of yesh.
And how this affects how is the negativity of this?
This negativity is where the soul ceases to be transcendent. Just like I said, like in the feeling.
Mm-hmm.
This is a level where the soul and its power is completely trapped in the klippus now. Mm-hmm. Because it's like an example I would give of the enabler when somebody, let's say a spouse, if someone who's really unhealthy, is there all the way for them, and then they get trapped there because they're not really helping. In the name of compassion, they've gotten or a student, or the drowning victim. Example would be where the soul has gone too low down, whatever reason. And what's the repair? So you see, he mentioned only 3 here.
Mm-hmm. So because he's talking about the 3.
Yeah, because the 4th is not yet discussed in the Shama and Guf. He's going to go now to 4. But let's talk about tikkun of these 3. That they should place their natural, their inherent nature aside, and they should exchange natures, meaning soul and body. And what that means is that the soul should go against its own grain and move from transcendence to existence. And the body and the animal soul should move toward transcendence from yesh, from existence. But if in a way that they should have a relationship to one another, and that's when, and that's who kashiyah, and that connection happens when they'll be in a measured way. Like you said, a soul, for example, that just is upset and distressed by being in this world and just wants to run, there's no midah v'shir. There's no strategy, there's no parameters. It's just, I'm running for my life. Instead of creating a strategy, engaging this the body, figuring out what we should do, how do we maximize our time here? How do we, despite our challenges, how do we study Torah, keep mitzvahs? Recognize the virtues of the neshama coming down below. We discussed all that earlier. But this is about getting them into the same room. The neshama and guf should begin to just appreciate that they need each other. In other words, recognize, and that's that each has to go away from its own nature. So like the Meraglim who wanted to stay in the Midbar, that's not appropriate. They have to go into the promised land. Somebody who says, I want, it would be like someone who says, I want 7 days a week work, too much immersion, or someone says, I want 7 days Shabbos. Too much spiritual. It's not that way. You need to have a balance. And we know it's challenging. It's much easier either to live the ascetic life or to live the material life, to be both. This is the whole interface. With the advantage of Tfilas Mincha, it says in Seder Hayom. Why does it say La'ilam Yadim Zoyer b'Tfilas Mincha? So it says because it happens middle of the day, while you're at work. Shachris Ma'ariv is before work, after work. Especially how it was once, when they didn't work all night. And Mincha was like tearing yourself away. So like Yosef, the Ovis, the patriarchs were all shepherds, somewhat separate from Wall Street. Yosef was immersed against his will, but he was there, and he maintained his integrity. He was an accountant, and then became a grain dealer, and he built a superpower. It took effort. This was business. But he maintained, he remembered Eglah Arufa, he remembered what he had learned with his father, he maintained his integrity. So Chassidus says the Merkava of Yosef in a certain way, because it goes into Biyah. The others were not Silas. So Metzilas, they're very high level, but they never went down. Yosef brings down Yaakov into Biyah, and he maintains that. I'm just giving you examples of all this. This is going to be applied in so many ways. So now he goes to Shin Daled Shin, and you see, just for the record, this is the Rebbe Rashab himself wrote, not Shin Daled, but Daled Shin, because Shin Daled is a negative connotation. You'll find this many times, like you won't find in Maimorim, you won't find a page 298, Reish Tzadik Ches, because it means something negative. So they write Reish Ches Tzadik, which means to wash. Rachatz instead of Ratzach. Right. So now he goes to Daled Shin, V'hine Tikkun HaBeis. Now this second Tikkun, now we're talking the fourth dimension, which is the second stage. Remember, throughout this two Tikkunim, just for the record, are not new. This goes back all the way, I would say, almost 100 chapters ago, where he said that in Tayu, the two dysfunctional difference between Eris and Tayu and Kalim Tayu. Remember with Midas Daim. So the Eris of Tayu don't tolerate each other. The Kalim of Tayu don't speak to each other. There's no give and take. And Tayu suffers from both those elements. Number one, there's no tolerance. Every Eris intense. Number two, there's no scarless. There's no symbiosis. There's no, as he put it, mashpia makabel. That's on the container level. The energy level is just no tolerance. They just burn each other up. So the Tikkun Beis that he's referring to is obviously so the first three are necessary. And the first is scarless, as he called it. The first is scarless, which is the first state of interconnectivity. Like I said, two forces that don't work with it. The first thing you need to do before you create peace is just quiet down their anger, or quiet down their antagonism. Intensity. Well, yeah, because here's not anger intense. I'm just giving it as an emotion, because you have nowhere to go. I mean, I gave the equivalent example would be like, God forbid, someone's wounded. You bring them to the emergency room. The first thing a doctor has to do is stop the bleeding. You can't even work with the person. You don't know what's working, what's not when the intensity is there. So you just need to get out of the line of fire, so to speak. Let's sit at the same table. Then comes tikkun number 2, which is talking about tikkun habeis u'be'inyan hiskals le'esakelim ba'ayin v'yeshulahem shemischalfen pu'uleseya. Another way, another code word he's using, another key word to distinguish between the two. The first one is chiluf hateva. The second one is chiluf pu'uleseya. Because the first one, you just simply want them to stop that intensity. The intense, if is completely intense, transcendent, and Keli is completely intense immersion, they'll never meet. But here we're talking the second level of interconnectivity. Once you finish the first one, is that they exchange their functions. So now, not only have they been subdued, they can begin to exchange functions, which I guess in mediation is an excellent way, where you say, you know what? Why don't you put yourself in the shoes of the other? It's more than just tolerating the other. Well, ultimate goal is to appreciate that each one contributes something that the other one does not have, so they complement each other. So they see that you really need each other. And now we're talking about that containers, that energy and containers receive from one another. So we're not just talking about tolerating or taming and weakening their intensity. We're talking about receiving from one another. If you remember, in the last chapter, you spoke about this also, but I guess I'm going to elaborate more, where when they really come together, it's actually the container makes the air more transcendent, and the energy makes the container more Messias, in a healthy way, obviously.
Mm-hmm.
So the bizarre thing is, when they're going to their own natures, they're actually damaging their own interests, not just the others. Because when the air is able to actually enter the keli shows the air levels of transcendence, because it's like fulfilling now the higher purpose, or is also not, the transcendence can be maintained and sustained. It doesn't just disappear. You're not just running for your life. There's a maturity to a soul that knows how to enter a body, like the maturity of Rav Shimon Bar Yochai when the 13th year, that he's repairing the world, and vice versa, when the body is not just following its own tendency, even if it's weakness, its broken heart, it so to speak sees the captain as the soul. The soul teaches it bittul mitzias, where a container on its own also only has bittul hayesh. So it teaches it a level of bittul mitzias, and it makes it a stronger entity, like we learned yesterday. Was an unbelievable thing that one of the ways to repair a person's low self-esteem and a broken heart on his own, the dysfunctional type number 2 was, said, it's very beautiful, top of page 616. That you should learn with him, Yisasi binyanim hanaylam b'madregas etre and stuff. See the fourth line? Shezem esameach or magberes hanefesh. By learning him deep in Yanim Chassidus is how you lift up a person who's by naturally a broken heart. Because it strengthens him and makes him feel confident. I think it's an unbelievable thought.
So because of the aura and soul has the power.
And also it has that power, but also on a practical level. When you teach someone who's very, very weak, they think so lowly of themselves, and suddenly you're teaching them about, the highest levels, and just elaborating. And you even say that God wants you, the highest levels of God want you here right now. It has an element of emboldening and strengthening confidence. Just interesting method. Yeah. So here we talk about another. So it goes like this. This means that they receive from another, means that through the yesh la'ayin shel hakeli, through the container moving from existence to transcendence, that will in effect generate and trigger a deeper dimension of the air moving from transcendence to existence. We saw this before. I see he's going to elaborate, but remember, we learned this before, this idea that when there's the aim dim lispal al matech kevidresh, when a person before they daven, they create the space, receptivity. So the energy, when it sees the receptivity of the student, so to speak, it draws more energy into it. So he says, so here's what the container is doing to the energy. This is that what the container is drawing energy, that it should be bisyashvus, which means it should be internalized, it should be settled, it should be bakili in the container, and it should radiate and illuminate the container.
That's good.
And through the revelation of the energy, now it goes the other way around. That through the revelation, through the radiance and illumination of the energy that is moving from transcendence to existence, this in turn will affect the bittul, the sublimation, la'ayin dakli, to the ayin of the container, that the container become more sublime. Second level of bittul, which means that through the revelation, through the radiance, through the illumination of energy in the container now joins, becomes one, and connected and viscalus and becomes submerged by in the energy, in the b'chinas habittul yichudillah, in a higher level of bittul than it has on its own. Because on its own, it's going to say, it's bittul hayesh. It exists, but it recognizes, like the chacham katan, like the wise person, in presence of another wise person, it recognizes, it stands in respect and deference to someone greater. But the bittul of Yichudei Law, the higher bittul, that nothing exists but God, that my whole existence is only because of that type of bittul, happens through the air going into the container. Like we learned, like it was explained earlier, chapters 292 and 294. There we went to the whole discussion how the real bit Yichudei Law is in the air, but because the container is submerged in the air, it assumes and can recognize that and senses it. But that's only when they join. So this is how, basically he's explaining here how each are contributing to the other. So Keli gives the air this ability to, the Keli teaches, draws the energy into its yashvus, that should be settled, it should be integrated and so on. And the energy, what it causes in the container, is a higher bittul. I mean, this is the interface at its best at work, where there's now that they've joined, and they're now they're each one like, it's like feeding back and forth. It's not just, remember, we're talking here like a true joining, true fusion. So we're not just talking about two forces that happen to be with each other and they can't wait to separate. They now really are becoming one, two that are real harmony. But harmony is harmony within diversity. We're not talking about Eir and Keli working together. I mean, he's describing the perfect union. The gamzet tzarich b'midah meziga nechena. Because this too needs to be in the proper measure and the proper formula and combination. The bittul shalaklei b'bchinas ayin, in the sublimation of the container in the dimension of ayin, transcendence, and in the descent and the being drawn down, the extension, the transmission of the energy to be more existent. The gamzeh, meaning not only the first three we need the right measure, also this one needs it, or it means the gamzeh, that even when they're doing this, even when they're giving to one another, it also needs to be done the proper measure. And when it's not in the proper measure, which means that the yesh, the existence, the parameters, the itness, the identity of the container, personality, becomes ayin, meaning it becomes nothingness, porous, transcendent, just like the essential personality of the energy itself, or the other way around. And the energy of B'chinas Yesh K'mahusa Kli Mamish, and the energy becomes a Yesh, an identity, a existence, exactly like the nature, the essential nature of the container. Oz Harihem Mischalfim Legamri. That's when they become exchanged completely. That's like, complete exchange of personalities. Vanas Legamri, Vanas Akli Eir, Va'er Nas Akli.
That's not good.
Right, well, it seems so. That the Vanas Akli, the container has become energy, but energy has become container. It's amazing stuff here because this is so much physics in this, similar to parallels in physics where energy and matter, because Einstein showed that matter and energy are reversible. E equals mc squared, and every energy matter is really energy, but because there's no, they're not important in physics. They're b'tachtenim. So no one really discusses. So why does energy actually become matter? Why doesn't it just stay energy? Why doesn't it just stay gas? And then when it does become matter, how do they really work? So that this can be a fascinating discussion of how energy becomes matter and matter becomes energy. But here, of course, the purpose is not being fulfilled. So here we've gotten. He's actually saying so the energy is becoming. I mean,
if it's too much, then
they've completely replaced each other. Like and both of them are not at all according to what the purpose they were sent to be, meant to be. Remember, interface, my friend. It's all interface. It's two forces that are opposites. They have to work together, not eliminate each other, and not eliminate themselves. So it's a constant dance that is very complicated because it's so easy. That's why, as I said, the Meraglim, everybody wanted the choice. It's much easier. Let's stay away from etre cheles sheshveh. What better words? Eretz echelet ishveh. The land, the container, eats, consumes its inhabitants. That's the container is eating up the air.
That's what it's saying here.
Yeah, exactly.
Right.
As he said also earlier. And the reason for this is because the yeshus are murgish b'yeser. Let me define that again, because murgish b'yeser literally means, you feel something very strongly. But here it's in the negative. Murgish b'yeser means you feel yourself and your identity very strongly. Even can be yesh and murgish b'yeser. In ayin, it's like the yesh of the ayin. It's like I'm so consumed with transcendence and connecting to my source that everything else disappears. Like you said before, the soul it wants to run because it sees this dark world. So what happens is its transcendence becomes its undoing. Its positive becomes its negative.
Mm-hmm.
So it doesn't become a yesh. We're not talking about resignation where the soul says, this world is so dark, I'm giving in, and like in the functional number 3, and I'm going to just go along with it and I compromise myself. No, the opposite. It's become too murgish. That's why you see, for example, like, you say the Keteris, Yom Kippur, the Avedis B'chashoy, quiet. We said before about Matan Torah, because of the rash, there was a lot of noise, created an Ayin Hara. Divrei Chacham Benachas Tishma. There's something to be said when someone does things with a certain humility, a certain modesty and silence. Not that there isn't any room for the other type of avodah, but that is when it's murgish b'yeser, when you see someone too heated, even in kedusha, it's always considered to be dangerous. You don't know where it's going to go. You don't know what's too much of your own self is stuck in there. Okay, murgish b'yeser. So that's the reason. Hayeshes v'murgish b'yeser. V'yuvel zebiyim hatera v'atfil. And we'll understand this. Aveda in the different in the union of the matter is a matter of Torah tefillah shein hofkim zemezem umeviyim zelazeh. Torah and tefillah study Torah and prayer. They're opposites of one another, but they bring to one another. The Torah and tefillah hein rotzav yeshuvim b'chinas ma'aban. He's giving now another Aveda. Before Aveda was ma'aban was the Shama and Guf. Now he's saying Torah and tefillah is Ratzeh and Shuv, yearning and returning, tension and resolution, or transcendence and containment. That's also a good word, transcendence and containment, transcendence and existence. They're the levels of Ma'oban. Torah is the level of Ma and bittul, like it says, Adam, Ma. Adam. The Torah is compared to Adam, which is the gematria, the numerical of Ma, as he said earlier. Not just it's called Ma, the service, the work through Torah, is in a form of drawing down, transmitting downward from Laila Lamata, from above below. You bring something down. The tefillah the tefillah prayer is the level of ban. The tefillah is malchus shem ban kaneda. V'ani is the level of tefillah, is the level of malchus, and malchus, as it's known, is the level of shem ban. And the effort, the work of prayer is the opposite. It's from elevating from below, mamata, from below upwards. That's the meaning. V'ani tefillah, I am prayer. V'ani, and I will pray. Laman, in order to sing your praise, and not be silent. That's prayer. It's reaching upward. The expression is the light, the lower Nehuda is light, Karid, Tadir, reaches, calls, constantly, the Nehuda Ilah, to the higher light. It's a yearning That when Hashem separated the higher and the higher heavens and the lower heavens, the Buddha is it light or is it not? It's not. Maybe the lower river reaches close to the higher river. Like it says elsewhere, the difference between tefillah, prayer, and tefillah, and phylacteries, tefillin, the shneim hem lashon ischabos. Both come from the same root. Tefillah, tefillin. The root of ischabos, union, connection. From the word hateful klei cheres means somebody who binds or repairs or connects a vessel, a pottery, yeah. So what's the difference between tefillin and tefillah? However, tefillin is the connection from above down. The tefillah is chabos l'matla, and prayer is the connection from below up. So you're just distinguishing between tefillah and tefillin is similar to tefillah and Torah. Vagam the ma'alban hein b'chinas ervikeli, and even though ma'alban are the level of energy and container, and energy is in a state of transcendence, of elevation, which means it's ascent and it's submergence in its source. And the container is explicitly descends and drawn downward. So it's a question. If Torah is ma, then ma is actually mamatlamayla. Ma is always going upward. Ban is going downward. Here we just said that ma ban is Torah and tefillah. Torah goes downward, and tefillah goes upward. As we explained earlier, chapter 284. And then the parentheses he adds, and because of this, it's explained elsewhere. The ma is in a state of yearning, of reaching upward, and ban is in a state of containment, of returning. Like the spirit of man, rises, ban descends. So we just stated that the soul and body is clear. The energy goes upward, container goes downward. Now we just said that ban is Torah and tefillah. Torah goes downward, and tefillah goes upward. So we have a question on the table. This is how they are in their fundamental nature, their fundamental personality, the b'chinas ayin v'yesh, and the levels of ayin v'yesh. She'er b'chinas ayin be'etzem husay. In other words, the difference between the two is that the air energy is fundamentally in its essential personality is ayin, transcendent, is nothingness, substances. Being that it is connected and cleaved and connected and to its source, in its source. And therefore it has the nature of ascent and transcendence. This is, of course, the ultimate ultimate and abundant and very intense transcendence. Ayin, like we discussed, like it was explained earlier, chapter 279. And on its own, the container is fundamentally yesh, an identity, because it's not connected, it's not bound to its source, in its source. Dveik is bimikated, connected in its source. In other words, the light is a point where the luminary, let's say the sun, and the light is always connected in its source. It begins in the source and goes downward. A container has a break. There's a jump, a gap. And that's why a container's nature is to descend and to be drawn down. And it's really now summing up like Perigresh Ayin Test is the Perigresh Beit Test. 289 is the container. But this is the way they are in their fundamental natures. But the way they extend into the cosmic order, according to the higher purpose, their higher purpose. That energy goes from ayin, from transcendence, to existence, specifically in a form of descent. And the container should be a container to the energy, and that is by it moving from existence, from containment, to transcendence. And specifically, especially, when as they exchange their functions, so then the energy is in a form of descent and drawing down, extending downward, transmission. And the container is in a form of elevation. In the parentheses he adds, and in both of them, both of them, this is the level of bittul, where they place themselves aside, their essence aside, that they should behave and they should be opposite of their fundamental nature, as was explained above. In other words, what he's saying is, this what we said, ma ban, that naturally ma is upward and ban is the way they are naturally. But Torah Tefillah is the way it was meant to be. And the way it's meant to be, air should be going downward and Keli upward. So basically, Torah Tefillah is a functional air and Keli, energy and container. So it's working properly. So it's no contradiction. He's talking here after the fact, where there's the bittul and they're doing what they should be doing. So yes, naturally, air is transcendent, Keli is downward. But then, when they do, they're infused and embedded within them is the program from the source that tells them to go the opposite of their natures. That's when ma, Torah, goes downward, from above downward. Ban, and ban, tefillah, prayer, goes from the bottom up. So that's the explanation, which is why he's bringing this whole thing, because he's talking here about how to repair the problem. So in other words, there's ma'aban as they are in their own, and there's ma'aban, how they join. And how they join, Torah follows God's rule, and so does tefillah. We're not talking about a wild situation where everybody's just doing what they want. Now another thing to add here. That which shem ban, the container, the tefillah, the prayer, goes from the bottom up. That's referring to the work and efforts of the Nevraim, of the creatures on their own. It is happening because of their effort. When someone gets up to pray, that is an effort and a yigiyah and a exertion of theirs. That's why it's called mamat l'mayla. He's giving a second answer now, another element. It's called mamat l'mayla because you're talking about the effort that comes from below. And that's the meaning of prayer, which is the work from below, the work of the below. As it's known, As it's known, tefillah, prayer, is a person who prays with his own strength, with his own energy, with his own initiative. As was explained earlier, Perigresh Beit Vav, chapter 286, and we'll explain later in the discourse that begins part of the Shalom. This is already after we didn't anymore add chapters, so he refers to it as a name of the mimer, as opposed to a chapter. And the footnote, they say that's in the next book, that's the next year, it's Tafresh Ayin Hey. It's in volume 2, page 766 and on. So this thing about prayer coming from your own effort was explained before, chapter 286, and we'll explain later in Volume 2. The Ayin, okay. So he's explaining how prayer now is based on the effort. So we're not talking now about what they're doing on their own, what they're doing because of the higher purpose. It's referring Mamatl Maila means the effort of the person. The Zayin Shekol Seder Atfilu B'Seder the Mamatl Maila. And this is the reason, this is the meaning behind the fact that the whole order of prayer is an order from the below above. Remember, we learned this in the previous chapter, the end of the Maimer, where we spoke about Kiseitz L'Molchama, the stages of prayer as the ladder, which he's now going to say. Like it says, is the dream of Yaakov, Jacob's dream, that he dreamt of a ladder that's standing on the ground, and its head, its top, is reaching into the heavens, not the heavens. The beginning of the journey of prayer starts from below, from the lower rungs of the ladder. And it reaches to higher levels all the way up to heaven, like a ladder going from earth to heaven. So this is the bridge, the interface. I see he's reviewing, he said this earlier at the end of the last discourse. And that's why prayer begins with Heidah, acknowledgement. Heidu Hashem. Or he's mentioned there, here he says it also. Heidu Hashem, I acknowledge. And before that we say, the first thing in the morning, we say, Moidani, I acknowledge to you. This is a general acknowledgement. This is ultimate. Katnus means literally smallness, but he means its lowest levels of revelation, of work. Sometimes katnus is referred to katnus hamechan, immature. But he means here tachlis katnus that there's no expansiveness, there's no revelation, there's no gilui, there's no. The miyad b'kumim mishnasa, as soon as he wakes up from sleep, chadoshim l'bkorim, which means rejuvenation or renewal l'bkorim to the mornings. He's like a newborn child, like a child that was just born. And at that stage, just was born. So then, all that's expected, or all that is that the work then is a general acknowledgement. Thank you for returning my soul to me. I acknowledge. And he says, "Meidani lifanecha." So Meidani lifanecha, I acknowledge to you lifanecha, meaning like pnimius. Lifanecha, to you, before you, refers to atzmus. And v'nichlolim b'zakol hamadregis. It's a kololistic thing. It's referring to the highest level, but you're just acknowledging it. And atzmus, you say lefanecha, you mean everything. You're not talking about the specifics of the blessings of God as a creator, or God as a provider, or giving us this blessing or that blessing. You're talking about acknowledgement of general atzmus. So on this stage, the bittul is be'etzem ha'nefesh. The sublimation, the submission is the essence of his soul, and all his faculties. But this is specifically in a general acknowledgement. So even though he's speaking about it in a high way, but it's a general acknowledgement that is not yet internalized in details. Which means he doesn't yet know what he's capable of understanding, and what he's only capable of acknowledging. In other words, he can't even distinguish between things that he could understand and things that he has to acknowledge. Everything at this stage, everything is in the form of just acknowledging. Because in truth there are things that you can relate to God. Yes, it's true that even in the later stages of Avodah you also need Heidah, acknowledgement, but at this stage, everything is just in a state of I acknowledge. So it's the lowest level. And that's why the bittul, subjugation, the sublimation is in all the faculties, bittul atzmi, and an essential type of bittul. Because it doesn't yet have distinctions. Like, for example, once you start beginning to work, let's say in other stages of prayer, or for example, then you start using your faculties. This faculty focuses on this. My mind understands. My heart feels. Here, all the faculties are all consumed with a general acknowledgement. It's like basically I'm standing before the king without any distinction between one faculty or another, and it's a bittul atzmi. I'm just here. So its strength is powerful, but it's very general. For example, when a person begins to comprehend, contemplate, then you can't say that the bittul, the sublimation and the subjugation is in all the faculties. Then it's only in the mind. And the contemplation or meditation is in specific levels of godliness. Which means it's in the levels that he's able to comprehend and understand, commensurate, proportionate to his quality of soul, his abilities, and the level of his understanding. So in other words, as soon as you go into the area of contemplation, number one, it's not all your faculties, it's in the mind. And there too, it's in specific levels that are commensurate where you're standing right now. Tomorrow you may grow and you'll have a deeper appreciation. So there's it's levels. And it also comes into your emotions. But it's measured, it's in grades, and it's in a diminished form, as it's known. He's talking now about Hasaga. He's going now not just by that also comes in emotions, even though he just said it only affects the mind, not the other faculties. He says, okay, contemplation also affects emotions, but there it comes in a very limited way. When a person is very much in the mind, the emotions are not dominant. It's only in a diminished way that it's affecting it, and graded, meaning it has descended. And the bittul here, on this level of when you contemplate, is not a bittul atzmi. It's not I'm standing before the king and my whole being is taken by him. Because now it's not a bittul atzmi, shariurak matzad hasaga, because it's coming only because of you appreciate it, by understanding it. And also contemplation itself, understanding something itself, is already mitzias davar. You're already, I understand. So there's an I there. And therefore, when he already understands and is able to distinguish, that means that there's already capable of having an of a knowledge and understanding. One second. The language is a little hard to read here. When he knows and is able to distinguish, that's where there is understanding and knowing, knowledge and understanding. Ayin Bittul b'shleimus. Well, the content I understand. And in this, he's also able to have acknowledgement, but Ein bittul b'shleimus bittul mamash b'kol ha'keiches. But here the bittul is not b'shleimus. It's not complete sublimation. The bittul mamash and literal bittul and all the faculties. Shari yesh b'zeh chelik dasod shu b'chinas mitzias. Because part of it, because within it, also part of it is his understanding, and there's a mitzias. Just trying to understand the language. Okay, that's the content of it. The and I was asking, and even when you're contemplating and understanding and kasogya and appreciating, even then there are things that are beyond your appreciation. So there's Haidah Levad. There you're only capable of experiencing it through acknowledgement. Shazel bittul atzmi kaneda. And that is as known as a bittul atzmi, because now you're standing in awe, or you're standing in bittul to something beyond you. Makom Mok, so he's asking a question. So we see even in Hasoga, there's also Heidah. Makom Mok, nevertheless, because since he does have he has knowledge and that which he's capable of understanding, aims a bittul b'shleimus, does not have a complete bittul. So even though, yes, there's Heidah to that which is beyond, but because part of this is also his understanding, I would say that one line has been replaced here. That not, either line is missing. Let's say I'm sorry. This needs to be looked up. There's something here. I think that there's some confusion of language here. Gamma sorry, goofy becomes mixed up. Okay, it's not complete bittul. The idea is because knowledge in general weakens, causes a weakening in the general bittul, in the general submission or suspension of self. That's not shouldn't be a complete bittul, literal bittul. Zel milas b'chinas hate shebahate. In parentheses, that's like memory. Yeah. In parentheses, yeah. And this is the virtue, the advantage of hate shebahate. Gam l'gab b'chinas hate, even compared to hate itself. Hate is a hidah. And so much more so compared to understanding. Even though the bittul, the suspension of self that comes to understanding is more pneumistic. See, because the other one's makif. You stand in awe, but it's not internalized. With asok, you could have a deeper bittul as he speaks elsewhere. The truth is, earlier in Chacham Stemah, that whole idea was that the mind itself can appreciate that which is beyond the mind. That's more pnimi. But you talk about bittul itself, in the state of bittul, subjugation, it's more in Heidah on its own, like in the morning before you begin to contemplate, than once you begin to contemplate. Because once you begin to contemplate, that element of asog, of understanding and knowledge, weakens the pure bittul, intensity of the bittul. Mashenk and Beidah Klol is going back to Moedani. In contrast, on the other hand, Mashenk, however, by Beidah Klol, in the general acknowledgement, it doesn't know what is capable of what is capable of understanding and what is capable of acknowledging. The acknowledgement is in atzmus itself. The atzmus itself, the essence of the infinite divine light, and in all the levels, and this is a fundamental, essential bittul. The essential bittul, that means, what is the bittul atzmi? That he gives himself completely. Mesina, to give. Mesina. They're both a form of giving yourself and submitting yourself to godliness. The etzem nafshin, the essence of the soul, and all its faculties. And this is the way it is by people who really serve God with it, truthfully. The beginning of their work, the beginning of their avodah, b'moedani, when they say moedani. So he's obviously qualifying that it's not someone who just says moedani. This is someone who's really serving. So moedani is this Eidah Klal. He's just explaining that it's a high level, even though it's an early stage of katnus, meaning it's just like a newborn child. So even though it's such a high state of bittul, But in Giluyim, in revelation, it's in a state of childishness.
Yeah.
When I say child katnus, meaning there isn't yet the maturity, the comprehension, the understanding, and so on.
Minute, so to speak.
Minute.
Yeah.
Okay, minute is a good word. So this is going back. This is all discussing here. This is all a discussion in Aveda of Mamatalamayla, the second explanation of Mamatalamayla, why he calls Ban, Tefillah Mamatalamayla, because it's working from below up. The effort is below, that's prayer. Explain that's like the ladder, you're climbing up, down, upward. And he began with saying Moida'ani and Hoidu, and before that Moida'ani is the first step. So this was a whole elaboration. Now this first step, there's no Giluyim, there's no revelations. It's a minute in the revelation level. So it's a complete bittul, but it's in that sense it's Tachas HaKanos. Afterwards we say Hoidu Hashem. We acknowledge to God, call out his name, call him by name. Here is already Kiru B'Shmei, you're already a knowledge, have some knowledge you mentioned. In Moedani you don't even say the name. Here you have some idea, some knowledge in the name Havaya. Hulamayla Mahasaga. One second. Oh, I correct myself. It's probably higher than Moedani, but he says now, knowing Havaya, Yudke Vavke, Havaya is higher than understanding. My mistake. Haidul Hashem is still an extension of Moedani.
Yeah.
Because knowing God is higher than human comprehension, and there is only we're only capable of acknowledging. That's interesting.
Okay.
Let me. Haidul Hashem Kira B'Shmei is explained like this. Haidul Hashem, I acknowledge Hashem, Yud Ke Vav Ke, because there only acknowledgement works. Kira B'Shmei, I call his name. Name is already a level of Giluyim. Shmei Shel Havaya, what is the shame of Havaya? You know what? Because Haidul Hashem Kira B'Shmei, what's the name of Havaya? That's already Shem Adnei Velikim. That's how the essential name of Havaya, which refers to the essence of godliness, manifests in the name of Adnai and Elikim. And that's already how God becomes Keich HaPel, becomes a creating force. A creative force. Keich HaPel, the force that affects the universe. Sheba B'Slapshus, that manifests B'Hanifel, the Keich HaPel B'Nifel. It's like a creator. The creator that manifests, that enters and into the thing he's creating. Shom Shayach Kriya V'Amshach. There you already can have a calling, and when you say Kiru, I'm calling to you, that's already an appreciation. You already have some type of something you can grasp. Haidah, you don't grasp it at all. That's Hasaga. Hasaga is grasping it. Once you grasp it, you don't have that bittul atzmi, even though it's more internal. Now, Haidul Hashem is the acknowledgement. Kira B'Shmei, you already begin to grasp it because it's how the divine Havaya comes into the name of Havaya, which is how it manifests in creation. Explain the whole stages of early davening, and this is through the preparation, through the preparatory blessings on the morning that you say after Modani. In other words, comes Modani, then come the blessings, then comes Haidul Hashem. So how do you reach Haidul Hashem? This comes after the preparation of the morning prayers, morning blessings. The one who gives the rooster understanding, and opens up the eyes of the blind.
That's wisdom. That's wisdom. Okay.
It doesn't say here. Basically, he's just saying that you're acknowledging God's blessing us with faculties. The hu'inyan asiyas hakelim. Because those blessings is about forming, shaping the containers, creating the containers. And through that you can have understanding, knowledge, and grasping. So as Moida Ani is before there's any faculties at work. Just acknowledging the bittul atzmi, all your faculties. The blessings begin to already build your containers. So you could say Modan is like the energy level. The containers are being built in the brachos hashachar, and that leads to Hidul Hashem, where you begin to have some comprehension, some kirus, some call to the name. So even though it's building the containers, it's still all this is still acknowledgement. So we have Moida Ani, the blessings that start building the containers, Haidul Hashem, which is still acknowledgement. Kiru B'Shmei is already beginning to identify something, and then he considers. And afterwards comes the verses of song. Psukkah D'Zimra comes after Haidu, Baruch Shomer, and so on. Who has bonus be'in isavus yeshmai? He said some of this already in the last section, the end of the discourse. This is really the contemplation, the creation from nothing. Ex nihilo.
What's the accomplishment of the Kriya and Hamshachar? What does that do?
It says that you're able to have some type of something to hold on to. So in Haidu, you're beginning to. It's the next day, but it's still Kira B'Shma. You're calling his name. It's still acknowledgement, but it's already in something lower than Avaya, so you can have some little grasp of it. Okay. Now, Psukkah D'Zimra is bonus being Savas Yeshmayim. The Zel Amavur Psukkah D'Zimra. This is what is discussed and explained when we say in those verses, in those verses of prayer. In Savas Elamas talks about the creation of the world, and how all creatures praise and Mahalim. Praise and admire, adore. But who is and generally, this is really the excitement and the stimulation of the feelings, of emotions. Because creation from nothing, it's higher than comprehension. It's higher than ability to grasp. Because the creature, whose mitzias, his whole being is yesh, is to be a personality, is to be an it. Does not have the capacity to comprehend how he was before he was created. And how this creation came to be. Because you are it. Like Einstein said, you cannot change a system from within the system. If you're part of the system that was created, you cannot understand what was before your existence and how that came to be. Because you are the product. The product cannot talk about the producer or the process of production. Because you came as a result of that. If you would go there, you wouldn't be a product, you'd be the creator. This means to comprehend and understand, appreciate the Ayin Eliki, the divine energy. But here's something, Ayin meaning the divine mystery, you can even say, the divine nothingness. Nothingness as a meaning by us, we don't relate to it, the Ayin. And how from nothing came something. How from no being, became create an existence of something. Well, and below, we don't have any examples for ex nihilo. And the example that we have below, from tzmicha shalaya de'zriya, from something that grows without it being planted. Hey, this does not explain to us how something comes from nothing. Because this itself is wondrous, is Dover Nifla, mysterious, not necessarily. Dover Nifla is wondrous, but more than Dover Nifla is astonishing. Dover Nifla Masoga, the astonishing, Dover Nifla beyond comprehension. How could something grow without something being planted there? The gamat smicha shadezriya is a gamke davke behefse dagan. Even when something is planted, even when something grows after it was planted, it also takes place with the deterioration and the rotting, hefsed hagarin, of the seed. So we see a seed has to rot as it slowly changes into a plant. But without planting, it's absolutely astonishing. How from a power of growth, spiritual, yitzmicha gashmis, ilanas vesavim, should come the growth, physical growth of trees and grasses and plants. Because there is some type of power in the earth that allows vegetation to grow. But how that goes from a spiritual power to a physical one, to actually see physical elements, is astonishing. So even this example does not give us example how this creation takes place. The only thing this is an example for, that we see in this, the fact of creation from nothing. But the fundamental thing itself, how that happens, and what was there like before, like you said before, is higher than comprehension, beyond comprehension. He's going back now to prayer. This is an elaboration in Avodah that I guess it's relevant to this whole thing, which we'll see how he concludes it. But it's all about how the yesh becomes an ayin, obviously, in Avodah. So he says like this: This is the meaning behind when we say Le'elam, a person should always organize his praises of God. So it's an organized way. Because when we say Sipur Shvachim, to speak about the praises, to praise God, to speak of his praises, is higher than comprehension. Like a person who tells and relates the greatness and the exaltation, the exalted state of a king. When he talks about it, it's not that he understands his greatness and his exalted state. He just tells and talks about the greatness of the king. And that itself, that creates an excitement and stimulates the soul. The same thing is when we speak of the praises of the Lord, speak the praises of God. It's beyond comprehension. And that elevates, lifts, and elevates the soul. And in general, this is the excitement, the stimulation only of the emotions. So he's talking about Psukkah de Zimra. So we covered Heidah, Moedani, the Birchas HaShachar. We covered Heidu. Now he went over to Psukkah de Zimra, which is the next stage in Midas. And he explained this is already about creation. So it's not comprehension, it's emotional reaction. Emotions. Because comprehension, as he just elaborated, that we don't have yet in this stage. Because you don't understand how that takes place. You have examples for it, and you definitely can be affected, like we can talk about it, as we do in Psukkah de Zimra, and be stimulated and excited, though we don't yet comprehend it. So this is Midas. In Psukkah de Zimra, hu meloshen lezamer aritzim. Psukkah de Zimra, the Zimra means song, but Zimra also means lezamer aritzim, means to cut out, uproot, to tear out weeds. Shulahachlis kol ha choichim v'akeitzim, the nefesh habamis. What is the meaning of that? It's lahachlis, to cut. All the barbs, choichim, are the needles. What do we call the thorns? All the thorns and all the needles, the nefesh habamis of the animal soul. Hamoinim, that block and impede his galos hakeches nefesh alikis, the revelation of the faculties of the divine soul. Just like we see in a vineyard, the keitzim, the thorns, hamoinim tzmichas heilonis, that impede the growth of the trees. Like the weeds, you have to cut out. Same thing as the thorns of the animal soul. Impede and block his galus hakeches, the nefesh alokis, the revelation of the faculties of the divine soul. And through the stimulation of the emotions in Psukkah de Zimra, when we talk about God and the creation and all that, we cut out, unweave, we cut out these thorns. What's it? Is actually cut. Remember, he said this also in the previous chapter. This is the chkikim bachutz. This is the, I would say, chiseling from the outside. Like a chink, right? And the thorns of the soul of the animal soul, you can say, these are when people speak things that are not divinely directed. Like Litzonis, just plain folly. Litzonis is making fun. Huh? Comedy? What? Litzonis. Making fun. And empty words. They're not even something that has a desire. You could say, it's meaningless words. You could say, so you could say, ostensibly, that they have nothing in them. There's no substance. And they're not compared. You can't compare them to physical desires. Shenasa Helen v'Hester, that create a concealment and a covering, or machlish, and weakens the power of the divine soul. Like it says, this is Zohar that says that when the body is strength, took for the gufa, the strength of the body is the weakness of the soul. When the body is strong, meaning in its desires, it darkens it darkens the energy, the light of the divine soul. You can argue these words of folly, empty words, they have nothing in them. Just making some humor, some jokes, and speaking words that have no benefit. So he's asking a question. He's saying these are the kretzim, these are the thorns of emes, but in truth, comes in the game of etre. This is also very important. This also is vinegay. This is very much relevant and touches us. Because the divine soul is captivated by them, is captured by them. Nechas behem gets grasped by them. Gets trapped by them. She'enu yochel alis. In the way that it's not able to elevate. So in other words, when a person speaks such words, what happens is, the words have no meaning, but it's affecting the soul, and the soul is like trapped there. Because you put the soul into a room where there's empty words, it's not able to climb. Additionally, it's also known that empty words, dvarim means betelim, empty words that have no purpose, cause negative thoughts, foreign thoughts.
Did we skip the line?
No.
Oh,
no, we skipped to several lines. I'm sorry. My mistake. Yes, I did. Is gams in the game 8. Can nefshik is next ben. Ve'inu yachalalis. Ukitziporim hanechozim b'pach. What is that? That's referring to birds that are trapped in pach, in dirt, in mud.
That's a trap. And pach is a trap itself. Is it not?
Pach, it could be pach.
Pach yakshin. Pach yakshin, for instance.
Yeah, like birds that are trapped in a trap. It could be and a chazim are captured in a trap. And it's understandable and it's understood that the animal soul definitely causes that he cannot get close to something that is divine. And definitely not able to have love to the divine. So in other words, that this Dvarim B'Teilim for sure affect the animal soul, that it shouldn't be able to get close to God, and definitely not love. But he's saying, but also the divine soul is trapped by them, that it cannot climb. Gam Yadua, another element, is also known Dvarim B'Teilim Gein Machshav Zaros. Empty words. Though they're empty, they cause foreign thoughts. That confuse, that disturb the divine soul. And this is the meaning. These are the thorns that block and impede the way. And moreover, even more so, she gave one example of the Ketzim is the B'Teilim and the Bachushim in the senses of sight and sound. They're called Sisuri Aveda. Sisuri is like the tool. Sisuri.
Spies. Go-betweens, middlemen.
Agents.
Yeah.
Ambassadors. Sisuri Aveda. They're the ambassadors of sin. Like we say, you shall not follow after your hearts and after your eyes. As it says, the eyes and the heart are two agents, are two undercover agents, are two spies. And when the things that the eyes and the hearing, what we hear, what we see, and what we hear, is negaya, reaches and touches even deeper, more deeper than just the words above. Nevertheless, they're still called not sins themselves, they're only called agents of sin. So they touch, they're the agents of sin, and they are like, what is it, Makol Mokim? Okay, because they're not the sin itself, they are the agents. They are the thorns that block the revelation of the faculties of the animals, of the divine soul. And all back to Psukkah de Zimra. Psukkah de Zimra, hula zamer aritzim. And Psukkah de Zimra, Zimra, from the word zamer, it's to, what's the word I want to use? It's not unweed.
Prune.
Prune is not the word.
It cuts away.
Prune is more shaping and harnessing.
Okay.
Prune is also a word, but I think the zamet is much stronger. Zamet is uproot. To uproot, cut these the weeds. The Psukkah de Zimra, how do we do this? By the praises and the adoration. The praises. The Psukkah de Zimra of God. Nigba nafshe, his soul, his spirit, gets lifted. The Maila Madregel Yemishem Shaykhlin Yom Kelu. To a higher level and dimension that's not capable and has no relationship to these type of matters, these inferior matters.
Does that mean if you were nikshal in these these thoughts, that the Psukkah de Zimra helps you to get away from them nevertheless?
I don't know what that means. That means that it's one of the things to do in Psukkah de Zimra. It didn't say it that way. He's saying that this is the way. So obviously, if a person has something of this nature, Psukkah de Zimra is a tool for that. Yeah. Okay, now he goes next place. That's Psukkah de Zimra. Then comes after Psukkah de Zimra comes the blessings before Shema. Who in Hasaga of his knows. Now he's getting into already contemplation, understanding, and contemplation. How these angels, the burning angels, say Kadesh, because they understand how the divine, infinite divine light, energy is Kadesh, is holy, and removed Ma'ilim is from the worlds. Completely distant. And that which radiates and illuminates in the worlds is only Kvede, it's only his glory, a reflection of his majesty. And that's why these seraphim, these burning angels, are in a yearning to be engulfed, submerged in the essence of the divine infinite light. Hasagosum, and they find him, which are a lower level of angels, Srofim are Bria. They find him a Nasiya. They find him, it's Hedre Sagosum, Emin Baruch Shareitzim Ba'am Shachar. So they say Kaddish, because Kaddish is a sense that which is beyond and removed from existence, and they want to be included in that. They find him because of their lack of understanding. They say Baruch, blessed. Shareitzim Ba'am Shachar. They want this, blessed. They want to draw down. They want this transmission. They want this energy. So when we say Brichas Krishma, and we're talking about and meditating on what the Srafim and Efanim do, this causes hazaza, a movement, a shake-up, a stirring, or bittul primi, an internal suspension of self, ba'nefesh habamis, in the animal soul, because these angels are the source of the source and root of the animal soul. So when he hears about how they are being consumed by it, it shakes him up, creates a stirring, a movement. Azoza has many meanings, but it's basically to be moved from his place, but more than just a movement, almost like a shock sometimes. Azoza. When something's locked, it's like cracking it open, so it's begins to. The gamba nefshal kiri, see nowadays, bonus being in srofim ve'efanim, nasa rotcha shlo gamke beifik. That's the animal soul. Also, the divine soul through the meditation, contemplation about the srofim ve'efanim, about these angels, causes the animal, the divine soul rotcha shlo to have a deeper yearning. Gamke beifik should also yearn the same way like those angels do. Because the animals, the divine soul also stands in such an emotional such a feeling of such a movement. It is that it wants and desires this elevation and this being submergence in the infinite divine light, blessed be He, of God, godliness. That means he doesn't want to have energies and revelations. He wants to be included, submerged in Atmos, in the Etzem, in essence. Or he wants that this divine revelation should be drawn down and come and be transmitted below. I mean, just two things that the Nefesh Elokis would want. Okay, so now we've finished that. So we've gone through Haidah, acknowledgement, that has no grasping yet and understanding. We went to emotions of Psukkah Zimra. We went to some contemplation that takes place through Krishma. And then he says, the primary dimension of intellect, mind, who be Krishma, is in Krishma, is in Shema itself. Bizbanus da Hashem Echad, in the contemplation that God is one, the Echad, Shahu Echad B'zayin Ekim Va'aretz, Echad is Rosh Hashanah, Aleph, Ches is 7 and 1, is 7 heavens and 1 earth, and they're all one. So it's in a contemplation, Shahu Echad, in the 7 heavens, Va'aretz, and in earth, the Dalad Ruchis, that's the Dalad. So Aleph is 1, Ches is the 7 heavens and earth, and Dalad and the Echad is the 4 directions in the world, north, south, east, west. That God is one in all of them. This is the contemplation that even after the world was created, it's still completely sublimated and one with the infinite divine godly light. So before he was talking about, let's say in Psukkah Zimra, that we acknowledge that God created, but we have no contemplation, understanding how. We just know that it was created, and we live in our contained world. Here, you're beginning to appreciate and understand that even as you exist, that also is really part of godliness. And once you crown God, once His sovereignty, once you cause His sovereignty to be above and below, and in all 4 directions, more than that you don't need. or Sulei Tzricha more that he doesn't need. I have to look up what the source for that is. For who hayichud bebeze fani hayichud l'mayl lamata l'mamat l'mayl k'moshkos l'mukamacha. This is very important in the whole Hemshel because this two types of yichud, he refers to it again. So he's saying now this is the unity that happens in two ways. He mentioned it earlier, many chapters ago. I'll have to find that. But it's relevant to the whole Hemshel Ayin Beis. I'll explain in a moment. Let me first read it. And these are the two different types of unity. From above down and from below up. Like it says elsewhere. This is what happens in the Shema. That you have both yichud. The yichud of knowing that even after it exists, he's still here. The difference between Mamal and Matlamal, generally speaking, he speaks about this at length in Ayin Beis in different places. And it's very much part of the theme of Ayin Beis, which is, as opposed to Samach Vav, which is the bittul hayesh, this is the birer hayesh. They're more focused on tefillah, being a ben shenasa eved, and here's an eved shenasa ben. Meaning here the focus is on internalizing and making it one with the divine, the interface. There the focus in Samach Vav is much more going out of yourself to accept something beyond us. Both are necessary. So yichel mamatla matla, as he said earlier, is mamatla means that that even after it exists, it's like it doesn't exist. And mamatla maila, I believe, or maybe the other way around, is that its existence itself is divine. We'll look it up. It's one of the two. I know it's on this side of the page. I think it's the other way around. Mamatla maila is that even after it exists, it's nothing. And mamayla lamata is that in its existence, it's one with the divine. But that's the way it is, yeah. So it's obviously the mamayla lamata is more primistic. This is connected to what he said before, that eined novade, that with him he exists, or even with him he doesn't exist. And this is the true meichin. This is the true, of intellect. And the bittul it causes is one of unity, that you actually become united with the thing you're bottled to. See, in Haidah, as he said, it's not primistic. Haidah is you're acknowledging God. There's no hasog at all. There's no contemplation at all. In Psukkah Dezimah, there's contemplation, but you don't understand how that happened. And there the focus is more, as he says, is to get rid of the weeds, the thorns. In Birchas Krishma, you're beginning to see how the angels appreciate something and they want to become part of it. But in Shema, you're actually talking about Yichud, how we are connected with God, which is ultimately the Er and Keli coming together in the fullest sense of the word. So you could say right here, and I want to see how he concludes it, but you could see right here how the Keli can be subjugated to the energy in different levels through prayer here. We'll go back to that in a minute, but the bottom line is now it's Yichud Mamash. And now we come to the highest. And afterwards we reach to Shemoneh Esrei, Shehu Lefnei HaMelech, because bittul mitzias mamash. That's like someone who stands before the king, bittul mitzias mamash, complete bittul. Complete suspension of self is the whole mitzias. What's the difference between this and Moita Ani? Let's see. Remember, obviously this is now coming after the faculties have been used. So you're not just Moita Ani, it's like before. Right? When you woke up, it's like a new child. The difference between the bittul of a new child, a newborn child, and the bittul of a great tzaddik who's standing in bittul is obvious because one is also with the faculties. The Zayin and Kol HaKriyas V'Yishtachvus the Shemoneh Esrei. These are all the bowing. And the Kriya, Kriya Kedim is when you bow with your knees, and Mishtachvus is only with your head. So these are the bowings that we do during Shemoneh Esrei. Shezel B'chinas bittul mitzias. These are reflective of the bittul mitzias where you bow to God. Harishakol Seder Atfilah. Now he's summing it up. So we see from all this whole almost 2 good pages. The whole order of prayer is an order of from below up. So and therefore it's naturally understood that the bittul in this the selflessness, the subjugation is only a bittul hayesh. The machas is avedus hanivra, because he's going back. This is the second explanation why he calls them a matul l'mayla as opposed to Torah. The first explanation was that even though Torah is ma and prayer is ban, but that's how they are. Ma and ban on their own. Ma goes up, ban goes down. But the kavanah, Torah goes down, and ban and tefillah goes up. Here he's explaining that this is all part of our work below, from below upward. Being it's from Avedus HaNivra, it's the work that comes from the Nivra, the Koyach Hatzmei, with his own initiative, with his own self-generated Aveda. A Nivra, at the end of the day, cannot have bittul mitzias mamash because he's a Nivra, he's a creation. He cannot be completely sublimated his whole existence. He still remains a yesh. So it's bittul hayesh he can have. Even the Shem Nesra that he just said, that's called bittul mitzias, is bittul mitzias of within the yesh. V'hainu shegam hamadrega hagavayas v'hanayos bein habittul shenikol bittul mitzias, which means that even the higher levels, the highest and most exalted levels in the bittul, which is called bittul mitzias that we just said, let's say in Shem Nesra, hine lefia emes, means bittul hayesh levat. In truth, it's only bittul hayesh levat. So that's ban. Omnam shema. However, shema zero shabom mamayla. This is what comes from above. She'ein zeh b'hanivra b'keich atzmei. This is what comes from above. This is not what the creature has on his own. On his own. This is what he was given from above. And this is transmission from above down below. So remember, we're speaking about that which comes from the etre and keli on its own, and that's what they get from above. They get the bittul from above. It's not their own. Bittul is not the domain, the essential domain of etre and keli, but it's embedded in them from a program above them. But they have to do their part for it to generate, to be the catalyst, to spark that bittul. So it's a constant effort from theirs, like he said in the previous chapters, and that which is above. So he's bringing it back now to Torah. And this is Torah, shenikra etre, that's called etre, energy that, like it says v'teira etre, ner mitzvah v'teira etre. The light of the right light of your face, you've given us your living Torah of life. But nitna mamayla, and it was given from above. Shezen yematan teira. You see matan teira. Matan teira, tefillah, we generate. You sit down, you start davening. Tefillah is not something given to us. Matan teira is a gift. Matan teira is a gift. The whole ina teira becomes some shacham maila. The whole teira, the whole ina of teira is transmission from above below. From above below. And therefore the bittul that it causes, the bittul within it, is a fundamental bittul. Even the bittul hayesh that it brings is also a bittul. In tefillah, the opposite, even bittul b'mitzias is bittul hayesh. Even the sense of that there's nothing but, it's still ultimately, it's because it's driven by you, you created it. A person can't create on his own something beyond himself. But in Torah, because it's coming from above, even the bittul hayesh is a fundamental bittul. Remember, he explained gufa, like the body of Moshe, that was the ultimate example. Moshe was opposite Chanech and Eliyahu, their bodies went up with them. So it was a positive example of this functional too, but in a functional way, where the container becomes completely part of it. But Moshe worked on his body, and it was the soul of the body down here below, to the point that it was bittul till it became a container for the divine. And I have to say, definitely, we must say that it's a form of bittul mitzias. And the same thing will be in the future, in general, all souls of Israel. So we see from this that tefillah, the yesod b'chinas ban, ari b'chinas alam u'matlama. Finally, this tefillah, prayer being ban, is an elevation from below up. Bittul b'zeh b'chinas bittul hayesh. And the bittul in this subjugation and the sublimation is a bittul hayesh, where it exists, you exist, but you experience in transcendence. V'hu inyan bittul hakelim. This is the bittul of the containers. V'atera hu shema. And the Torah is Shema, is the bittul of Ma, v'hu b'chinas hamshachim ma'ilmat, and that's the transmission from above below. V'abittul b'zeh b'chinas bittul atzmi. And this bittul, this subjugation, is in its entirety. It's not just an existence, total transcendence. Shagam bittul hayesh, which means even the existence that transcends, even bittul hayesh, the yesh is still there, and it's transcending. Hanasa idea Torah, who b'chinas bittul atzmi. So even the bittul hayesh that comes through Torah is also a bittul atzmi, is also a fundamental, essential bittul. So this concludes chapter 304. So basically what he's saying is like this. That the fourth dimension of this functionality is balanced out by them being perfect matched with each other, etre and keli. This comes from bittul that comes from above, but they do their part to be a container to it, both energy and light, and energy and container. And they learn not just to tolerate each other. They don't just connect, they also give to each other. Each one gives to the other, and it has to be proper balance. They should not overwhelm each other. And to understand this, in Aveda, he gave Torah and Tefillah. So Torah and Tefillah ends up being just like Neshama and Guf. So you talk about etre and keli, Neshama and Guf, now Torah and Tefillah. Torah is Ma. So Torah introduces the element of etre, the bittul of etre, and Tefillah is the bittul of keli. So one is a bittul hayesh, and one is bittul mitzias. He doesn't discuss how they they work Torah and Tefillah with each other, but from what he describes, you can tell, you can understand what's going on here. That Torah brings what etre brings down, and Tefillah is what brings the keli. So if you have Torah and Tefillah together, you have the proper combination. If you only had Torah, you would have etre without keli as much. So Torah brings bittul mitzias to the kelim, and kelim brings integration to the Torah. Essentially is what the summation here is. So let's do the kitzur. Kitzur, v'hine b'zeh she'eretz gerim mekamu zeh mezeh. Now, in this that we said, that the energies of containers cause gerim. B'zeh she'eretz gerim mekamu zeh mezeh.
Two levels? The two levels?
Probably. This one and this that the energies and containers cause within and receive from one another. So they cause something and receive from one another. Like you said, as the container goes from substance, from existence to transcendence, this causes the etre to go from transcendence to existence. And the energy and its descent creates a bittul, a subjugation of the container. Okay, so now that's what it means. Now, this level, once they are ready now, affecting and receiving from another, and he explains what that means, that the yesha of the ayin, the keli, causes the ayin, the yesha of the etre. So here he's saying, if the container will be like the energy, and the energy will become yesh, like the container, this is the fourth dysfunctional type, the dysfunctional type. Summing it up. He actually doesn't even say that in the actual, he says it in the summary. Okay, this is the fourth type. And the repair and the healing is that they should be in the proper measure. And we'll understand this in Torah and Tefillah, which are ma and ban. Torah ma b'chinas hamshachim. Torah is ma, adam, transmission. Tefillah ban b'chinas Allah. Tefillah is ban behema, going upward b'chinas Allah, elevating. V'aloi ma ayin v'aliyah u'ban yesh v'yirida. Question. And isn't ma a state of transcendence and elevation, and ban is a state of identity and descent? And we just said Torah is Hamshach and Bechinas. Zer be'ez v'kelim, v'chein b'nefesh guf be'etzem u'husa. That idea that Ma'aban is elevation, there's transcendence and existence, that's in the energies in the containers, and also in the soul and the body, in their fundamental personalities. But in their joining with one another, through their bittul, through their subjugation to a higher power, this is Bechinas Mad Teira Hamshacha, Mamayel Mata, Bechinas Mad Tefillah Elah Mamat Lamayel. He makes it even clearer here in the summary than it was in the Pnim, in the actual chapter. In the chapter, he basically said, in answering it, he said, he didn't emphasize that Eris and Kalim and Neshama and Guf. So basically, Torah and Tefillah is how Eris and Kalim and Neshama and Guf work properly. In other words, energy and container on its own, soul and body on its own, could have, because their inherent nature is transcendence one, and the other one is identity, existence, they can have that element. But once you have the joining, and Torah and Tefillah, remember, our holy services, they're mitzvahs. There they manifest the way they should manifest. So Torah comes downward, and Ma, and Bechinas Ban Tefillah, Alon Matma. Now he goes on and explains what's the Mamat L'mayla of prayer. And this is what prayer is, the effort of a person on his own. And in stages that go step by step. Is first a general acknowledgement, it's a fundamental bittul, essential bittul. In contrast to comprehension, which is already existence. Not bittul atzmi. And that's when there's partially there's some acknowledgement and partially some comprehension, it's not a essential bittul. I want to go back. I misread those lines. I said maybe wrong. Now I understand them. Back to page, just to 619, what he said there, the middle page where I was confused. It says, "V'gam hasoga gufit b'chinas mitzias davar. Al ken k'shiyadeo mafkin shebzeh shaykh yediyah v'hasoga." That's it. So he's saying like this. But by haydah, real haydah, acknowledgement, you can't distinguish what are you understanding and what are you acknowledging. But when you could understand and distinguish that this has now understanding and comprehension, and this is capable of acknowledgement. As soon as you can distinguish between the two, that's what I misread. Because it has part of it is already comprehensible. Okay. I just didn't read the line right, so I wanted to correct myself. So now he goes back. And nevertheless, in order for him to be a real container in an internalized, integrated way, integrated subjugation, integrated suspension of self, you need to have comprehension. The tchila, so now he's climbing the ladder. First comes Psuka Dezimri, the songs of praise. His bonus Bisavis Yeshmayim, the contemplation on the creation of ex nihilo from nothing. She'ena Musik Betzim, that's fundamentally not beyond comprehension. Rak Shebchinas Habeira. It's only the praise of the Creator. The Spilas Hamidus, which causes the excitement, the stimulation of the feelings. And through this we uproot the thorns. They're like the empty words and similar. Before he says now he's saying empty words and similar. And more so what he said, the senses of sight and sound, seeing and hearing. That the divine soul is captured by them, is trapped by them. But Kolshkin and Nefesh Abamis, and surely the animal soul, Kimisal b'madrege al yena. By Pesukah de Zimra, it's very brief. Through Pesukah de Zimra, by saying the praises of the divine, of God, he elevates to a very high level, which cuts out these weeds, these thorns. Then the next level, Bichus Yetzer before Shema, his bonus, the Sofim Veifanim, the contemplation of the angels, the burning ones, and Veifanim, the wheels. And that is that he desires to elevate, or he desires in the revelation below. And the primary intellect is in Shema. His bonus b'Hashem Echad, in the meditation and contemplation of the oneness, the divine unity. In general, because it's prayer, it's bittul yesh. The Torah and Torah was given from above, and this is a essential bittul. And in Torah, even bittul yesh also becomes a bittul atzmi because it's coming from above. So you have here the interface at work, and that concludes this whole section. What concludes? It concludes the interface is at work that you need both Torah and tefillah. You both need that which comes from above, but that which comes from below, because you need it to be representing both sides, the containers and the energy. So he sums up in a beautiful way how all this joins together, and everything contributes to the other. Now, ultimately, Torah, which comes from Umayla, is what he says, that ingredient embedded in containers and energy and solarity that allows them to meet and join. But there's plenty that we have to do to be able to receive that. So it's a constant dance back and forth. So that concludes chapter 304. We did the page 617 through 621. Now chapter 305 begins a new subplot, a new section, which is all going to be explaining ultimately this power of Teva and the power of unity that it creates in the interface. But to do so, he goes now into a whole Lahavin calls up B'Tesus Beer to understand all of this in a deeper way. With additional explanation, he goes into a whole new discussion. But the interesting thing, it's connected Reimamus, it's connected to Hashem Elokei Ramamcha, the thing that he spoke before about Reimamus, which began Asisa Pella, the Aleph and the Pella. So this concludes an entire section, and we finish here at the bottom of page 621.